Wow, what a great introduction. Thank you. So, real pleasure to be here tonight. Liana mentioned about we doubled our team size. Today we had a team retreat. It's a 2-day workshop we've been working on, and I realized we've actually tripled our team size since that a bio was written. But just to start off, guys, they mentioned, I'm Velani, born and bred in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was meant to be an aeronautical engineer, which I got in for at Wits. I ended up not going. I came closer to Stellenbosch. I went to UCT, where I studied a BCom and majored in philosophy, politics, and economics. And during my course of my studies there, I had an idea around transportation. And that journey has led up to my present day with plenty of failures. In fact, that first business model was a B2G, which is business to government. We had a vision where we wanted to, like many people here, integrate different modes of public transport on your phone, allow you to track the public transport and pay for it. And that failed dismally after 4 years of going back and forth. But what I realized in that journey is that I was not in love with the how we go about solving that problem, but in love with the why. At LULA, our fundamental belief is that without access to transportation, you can't access economic opportunities. And without that, you cannot solve for poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And so what we do is we connect company employees to a network of private shuttles to take them from home to work and beyond. We do that by partnering with third-party vehicle owners, particularly 6-seater vans and larger, pick you up from your front door, pick up your colleagues, and take you to the workplace. Obviously, with COVID coming around, we had to innovate really quickly. And during that time, we launched a parcel delivery service to enable businesses to move their goods and move their parcels from their businesses to their employees. But in the process, we also then launched what we call a charter service. So a lot of people may want to go to the rugby. They may want to go to a pub. They may want to go anywhere as a group of people. And typically that process involves either calling a friend for a ride, calling multiple Ubers. We don't like to use the U word at LULA, by the way. Calling multiple U words and having to split payments, etc. But what we've then enabled you is to, for the first time in South Africa, digitally enable people, or primarily businesses, to use their phone or use the web to book high capacity vehicles, right? So if you want to go watch Kaizer Chiefs lose to Sundowns, you can use the LULA platform to book a 22-seater bus or a 16-seater or an 8-seater. If you want to go from the center of Cape Town and go to Franschhoek on a wine tour, you can book any one of our vans. Really fortunate that we have just over 800 vehicles on the platform, live in 5 cities, and a team of 34 people. 50% are women, 50% are men, and really connected to the problem that we're trying to solve. Congestion is at an all-time high in South Africa. CO2 emissions continue to increase. And of course, the continent of Africa is heating up 1.5 times faster than anywhere else in the world. So we need alternative ways to move. If we're talking about Africa having a demographic dividend, we need the physical infrastructure to move people from A to B in a safe, sustainable, and reliable way. And so that's what I do on a daily basis. I'm really fortunate that 3 of my colleagues are in the building today. Megan, who's our community manager, Simo, who's one of our front-end engineers, and a gentleman we refer to as Master KG, who's one of our back-end engineers. They're in the house tonight. And of course, we practice what we preach, so we actually use LULA to come here, and we will be using it on our way back. So that's a brief introduction on us, and I hope it kind of frames a bit of context on what we do, my journey thus far. And a full disclaimer, everything I am sharing with you tonight is my own experience. I didn't read it off TechCrunch, I didn't read it off Forbes, I didn't read it off whatever publications out there. This is unfiltered, real experience from the horse's mouth, as they say. And so I really have 3 critical pointers that I want to share with you guys about our journey. Really 3 quick pointers, 3 quick stories, and the lessons that followed from that. The first is a mistake I made in 2018, 2019. That's what I call hiring mistakes, right? Some of you have started businesses, some of you want to start businesses, but the most critical asset is your people. Now, a mistake I made was that we hired a senior resource. He was not a founder. He was supposedly experienced, and we noticed a lot of inconsistencies in the way this particular gentleman carried himself in the workplace. Coming late for work, telling lies, stealing company resources, in fact, even started extorting some of our engineers for money at some point. But the problem was, I felt desperate at the time. I only have certain skill sets that can run a business, and this person has worked in the industry before. He's famous. He's recommended by a friend. Surely I can trust him, right? Surely I need this person to be on my team because surely he knows a lot more than I know in my current state. Cut a long story short, 3 months later, we had to let him go. In fact, it was just about 5 days after his probation, so we couldn't actually just fire him. We had to do a mutual separation agreement. And we parted ways successfully, much to all of us' delight. But there were a few key lessons that I learned in that process. The first is when you're hiring people, even if your mother refers them to you, even if your girlfriend or your boyfriend refer them to you, even if Zule, Jiku, and Henry refer them to you, please do your reference checks. I cannot stress this any further. Please do your reference checks. And don't just send an email and say, hey, we're checking up on Megan. Can you give... Call them. Find out how did they perform. Ask them very critical questions that make them worth being on your team. The second part of that is when you're starting a company, please do not hire C-suite levels immediately. So if you're founder or if you're a co-founder and a founder relationship, if you're a CEO and your co-founder is a CTO, do not hire a CFO or a COO or a CMO. There's a statement that says you do not climb a tree from the top. You have to start from the bottom up. So if you're going to hire someone that is supposedly senior, hire like a senior ops manager, then promote them to head of operations, then make them the COO over time. Because when you hire people, they also want to work towards something. And it's not necessarily about monetary rewards and all the fame that may come with running a startup. They have to physically feel that there is progress lined up for them. So please, when you're hiring, do not hire C-suite, right? Start them low and give them something to work towards. The third thing on that point is please always trust your gut, right? I'm telling you this because there are many times I've ignored my gut feeling about people, right? You cannot build a business without people. You cannot do anything in this life without people. As human beings, we are social. We exist in relation to other people. That's why we have relationships. So if you have a feeling about someone the first time and the second time, don't let the third time be the mistake that you regret. So always trust your gut when you're dealing with people. Your business is a business. It's not a charity. It's not a social project. It's not a debt you owe to someone. It's a real business. And do not make mistakes with your business. So when you have a feeling about people, act on them sooner rather than later. And lastly, on this point about hiring, in the early days, please ensure that you hire for the right attitude and you hire generalists. Don't hire people who think they're too good to be true, and don't hire specialists. Because the truth of the matter is, in the early days when you start a company, you don't know what you're doing, right? You're figuring it out. You don't have the pathway to being a unicorn laid out right in front of you and all you have to do is walk straight. You're actively learning on the job. And the truth is, if you hire generalists, generalists have the right enthusiasm and broad skill set to pick up what they want to learn on the job, and they're most likely to add value. If you think because someone is a CA and they worked 10 years at Standard Bank or at Old Mutual and they can now run your finances, you don't have the money to pay them, the shares probably aren't going to be worth anything so early, they're going to be out of there in a few months. And then you wasted a lot of money. So please always hire generalists in the early days and people with the right attitude. My second point talks about raising money. Now, we've been fortunate enough to have raised 3 different rounds of capital, both from local and international investors, angel investors, institutions, friends, families, fools, accelerator programs, you name it. We've been through the process. But the thing that I've taken very, very close to heart is that we've never ever publicly announced how much money we've raised or when we've raised. There's a very good reason for this. Firstly, I don't believe in making these announcements because this journey and this environment of startup life is filled with a lot of fluff, right? Someone once told me starting a business is hard. I cannot tell you how hard it actually is. Because people will tell you, oh yeah, you go through rejection, investor turns down your term sheet, you didn't hit the sales. There have been days where I wondered if this is truly worth the amount of energy I'm putting into it, right? There have been days when I thought I've seen the worst of this job, but then a few months later I saw even worse, right? I mean, for those of you who know the complexities of transportation in South Africa, especially with vans, you know very well, you can't just pull up and go into any area unannounced. Vehicles get stolen, people get shot, taxis decide you can't come here, please. You go through all these things. And you're sitting there like, all I wanted to do was reduce some carbon footprint. all I wanted to do was make sure that, people in call centers can get home after hours. But it gets harder. It gets a lot harder. And now why I mentioned this around fundraising and announcements is because when there's a lot of fluff in the ecosystem, you get distracted by the things that do not matter. Earlier on, you heard Jiku speaking, and he said there were vanity metrics. You want to measure your social media followers. You want to measure how many times VentureBurn writes an article about you. But the truth is, VentureBurn's not paying your bills, right? The truth is, your competitors, when they see how much money you raise, they say, okay, you raised $1 million, but they're sitting with $10 million in the bank account. They'll literally spend whatever you're spending on marketing times 10 and wait until you go out of business, right? So there's beauty in asymmetric information. There's beauty in not knowing, right? And when you're not talking about all the fluff that's out there, it helps you be sober about the things that matter. There's a book, I think it's by Ray Dalio, that talks about measuring what matters. And if you measure what matters, you need to ask yourself, what truly matters for my business at this particular point in time? And so for us, our belief is that whether you raise capital or not, it's not the metric that matters. Because your best investors are not actually institutions. Your best investors are your customers. So if you believe that, it's critical for you to generate sales, get that traction, get to profitability to the point where you do not need to raise money. There are plenty of businesses that are doing really well and they have not gone to VC Fund A, VC Fund B, VC Fund D to raise money. And so our belief is that we don't need to go about making noise about how much money we've raised, who we've raised for, because even when you raise money, you still have to produce a return. It's not free money. Raising capital is expensive. And from that, what I've also learned that in the early days is, I thought I was building this product that was so novel and no one has done it before, that when investors would reject me, I'd think, what's wrong with these guys? Can't they see the future? Can't they see how obvious this is? But the truth is, what you're talking about this vision that you have, you can only substantiate that by actually doing the work and validating that with traction. So no matter how big you think the market is, no matter how cool you think your tech is, and no matter how new and innovative you think your product is, if you do not demonstrate the traction, the likelihood of you being able to raise money will be relatively low. The second thing on this particular point is that in the early days, investors would just reject me. Say, oh no, too early. Oh, let's keep in touch. Oh, we like what you're doing, but we have to give it a pass. And I used to think, okay, great, that's the end of the relationship, keep it moving. But do you know what? Asking for feedback proved to be more valuable than them giving me a check when it did not match. The reason for this is because whatever feedback I would get, I would improve for the next conversation I'd have with investors. And you know what the truth about feedback is? Everyone these days wants to sound like an expert. So if I ask you, hey Jiku, what's it like building a startup for 22/7? Jiku's not going to be like, that's my IP, I'm not going to tell you anything. Jiku would love to give you that feedback for free because the only thing it costs him is his time. And he'd love to be, no disrespect. I mean, Jiku's a very smart man, but it's not like he's trying to seem like an expert. Investors will always be willing to give you free feedback. And when you take that feedback, apply it to your fundraise, you'll be able to then say, okay, cool. The next time I meet another investor, I'll be able to talk about these points. Because the truth is, maybe maybe the reason they rejected you was because you did not articulate your problem well enough. or your solution well enough. And now you go to the drawing board and you're able to rephrase that, and that may be the kind of tailwind that pushes you to get the investment that you needed. On this point, I realized that the best people who can help you raise money successfully is not just cold calling investors, it's actually founders in your network who've raised rounds before and your existing investors, right? Because typically what makes a connection with the investor is usually a warm introduction from someone they trust. Trust is a very important currency as you go about this journey of entrepreneurship. So if you see, okay, cool, I met Zule from Locum Base, I met Jiku from 22/7, you build a relationship with them and you say, hey, I want to raise some money for my seed round, you could ask them, say, hey, do you mind giving me an introduction to anyone you think could be fit? That already qualifies the quality of your deal by 50% because of the reference. So instead of trying to be in networking events, with all due respect, and chatting up every single investor you know, chat to the founders. If you chat to the founders, they'll point you in the right direction because they've done the hard yards, right? Part and parcel of why I, when Henry called me, hey, please can you come to fail nights? Part and parcel of why I do this is because the thing that we all have equally, rich or poor, black or white, is time. And we cannot afford to waste time making mistakes that I've gone through, that Jiku has gone through, that Zule's gone through. If you start a business today and you need to raise capital, it shouldn't take you as long as it took me. It should take you half the time. And it's not because I want credit for it, it's because it's going to benefit all of us in society. If your startup that's solving a major health tech challenge or major educational challenge gets the funding in a record time that solves a challenge for the fundamental fabric of society, and you got that lesson from a fail night, then we're all better off. And so it's really important that when you make connections with founders and existing investors, use that as a trajectory to get you to solve the problems that truly matter. Last but not least, and this is more of a science around fundraising, is that every kind of fund has what we like to call a funding cycle in terms of the calendars, right? If you're trying to raise money, with each investor, it's probably going to take 3 to 4 months if you're lucky, right? And you need to know that you can't start raising money in December hoping to get that paid out in January or February, because most of these funds are going on holiday. They're not really taking any new deals. And then if you need that money relatively soon, it's not going to be closed relatively quickly. You also need to understand that in the beginning of the year or the financial years, investors are still looking to raise more money to support their funds. Whereas if you come in the middle of the year or towards the third quarter of the year, investors are still looking to deploy the remaining amounts of capital. So you need to be very mindful of the calendar. Likewise, the difference between raising money in the northern hemisphere, like the US and Europe, versus in the southern hemisphere, their holidays are reverse. So in the US, people typically go on holiday around, I think it's, they usually start school August, September or so. Yeah. So when they're going on holidays, don't expect anyone to be looking for new deals. Right? So these are some of the little nuances that I've learned over time. Now, my third and final point around the lessons I've learned, and I'm begging you, like if you pay attention to any of these, pay attention to this one, because this one is the most costly mistake I've made. Like I mentioned, I studied BCom, I majored in PPE. I did not study engineering. I did not study software development. So one of the biggest mistakes I made as a founder was initially outsourcing the development of my tech to someone else. But I didn't outsource it to some students in Stellenbosch. I went to the belly of the beast. I went to Delhi in India. All right? I wish I had a slide over here that I could show you a picture of my dev team back then. This scenario, it cost me over 100,000 US dollars, which at the time was 1.5 million rand. And that was money I raised from friends, family, and fools, including my own savings. I'd never seen that amount of money in my life, just to qualify. So when this dev team of ours built this shell of a product that was hard-coded and never worked and then vanished overnight, if I said I cried, I don't think any of you would connect with that pain. And I remember telling my mom and dad, God bless them, that, the product doesn't work and the devs have run away. They just looked at me and said, yeah, you'll figure it out. I was like, Mom, what about a hug? Dad, what about something? Like, you'll figure it out. and I was really blessed that, favor found my way and I got into startup bootcamp, pivoted, met some of my engineers who are now part of the team, and we rebuilt from scratch. But it was a very costly mistake. For those of you who are very familiar with software development, if you hard code elements in your code, it's like driving a car and the interior is not actually made of anything. It's like, you're supposed to have leather seats, but you have like pop-up balloons. You're supposed to have an engine, but you have like a water cooler machine. Like it's not going to function. That's what I had to deal with. Incredibly embarrassing. Imagine you're selling to clients, oh, we got this great tech. This is what we do. Jiggy, 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 jiggy. Doesn't work. And like, but aren't you guys specialists? Isn't India supposed to like have millions of devs? Look, those are lessons I've learned, and I really do not want anyone to learn the same mistake. But there were 3 points I took away from this. Guys, if you're a tech company, right? LULA is a tech company in the transportation sector, right? We do not own any vehicles. Our secret sauce lies in our people and our technology, right? Anyone can get a van and try drive on main road and pick up passengers. Like, anyone can do that, but no one can do it as efficient, as convenient, and as smart as we can do it in this context. So the technology is what's making our thing work. So if you're a tech company and you really can't afford to have your IP controlled or managed or built by someone who's not vested in your business, right? It's like, imagine if Woolworths had all their food being produced and owned by, Pepco, hypothetically. It wouldn't make sense, right? You have to have that IP as a tech company internally built, controlled, and managed. You can't afford to outsource it. The second component about that is, if you are unfortunate that you do not have a technical co-founder and you venture into the space of saying, let me outsource the development, try and get a technical co-founder along with you, and don't go in blind, because software development is so specific that you can't afford any kind of misinformation flowing, right? You have to have someone who's on the ball, building the product with you. The third component of this is that software is a dynamic thing. It's never a case of build it once, transfer it, and you'll never need to iterate. Software is constantly living and developing. If you don't believe me, just look at your Instagram app, right? A few years ago, all you could do was scroll up and down. Now you have reels, you have stories, you have little quick videos. Software is constantly developing. So if you're a tech business, please do not outsource your tech development. Make sure that sits in-house with you no matter what, because context is always going to be changing and you need to control that IP. Ladies and gentlemen, with those few words, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to wrap up Fail Nights tonight. And I welcome any questions. Thank you for listening to me. I'm really here to serve people, solve problems, and hopefully build a better future for all of us. Thank you.